Hello everyone, Phoenix Knight here. Welcome to the channel, and welcome to Pinot with Phoenix for August 2024. It's been another very busy month on the channel, and we're all set to recap everything. It's been a very interesting week is the word I'm going to go with here. We'll talk a little bit about that in our special segment called Phoenix Needs to Vent. But before we get to that though, let's start off by recapping the games. Of course, as you might recall, August was Mythos Month on the channel, so we were playing a lot of Cthulhu Mythos-inspired games. Welcome in, Jester. You're just in time. Grab a little Pinot, and let's talk about the month that happened on the channel. So as I mentioned, we had Mythos Month on the channel, and our first game for the month took us right into the summer of Lovecraft, as we started off with Eldritch Horror. As many of you know, I really enjoy Eldritch Horror, so I'm not going to spend too much time singing its praises. But of course, it's a game by Fantasy Flight that has you traveling around the world, trying to solve mysteries around the Ancient One. In this case, it's called Phoenix Needs to Vent. It's not going to be an every month kind of thing, but in this case, there's a bit of a special. It's going to be kind of our special segment this month where it's been a long week and I need to vent, but we'll come back to that after we get through the regularly scheduled recap. Anyway, coming back to Eldritch Horror, as I mentioned, has you traveling around the world trying to solve mysteries around the Ancient Ones. In this case, our opponent for this year's Summer of Lovecraft was Azathoth, and we managed to win Eldritch Horror rather easily to go up 1-0 in the Summer of Lovecraft. So as per the house rules of the Summer of Lovecraft, we also started off with an extra item, but again, house rules on that. So that's it for Eldritch Horror. In addition to the Summer of Lovecraft, we also had several Call of Cthulhu adventures, as we did some solo RPGs. Our first Call of Cthulhu adventure found us alone against the flames. As many of you know, Chaosium Call of Cthulhu is an RPG system by Chaosium. It uses a depercentile system to determine your success or failures. And for this first adventure, we were going into Emberhead, into their festival for our yearly visit. And for the end of this adventure, we actually ended up blowing up a section of New Hampshire about 60 miles in diameter while killing ourselves in the process. Which is basically my favorite adventure, which is my favorite ending of that adventure. I think I've only ever escaped that adventure once, I want to say, and that's the character that I took in to Masks of Nyarlathotep when our Friday group, at the time it was a Friday group, started that very briefly, but we never really did much with that. So I may pull that character into some other stuff I'm thinking about on the channel, but I think we're going to be a while before we get to that. Now there's not really any kind of order in terms of the games, because I was doing a lot of stream testing in between everything with the new laptop that I picked up. So like I said, there's not going to be kind of an order. We're just going to talk about all of the games that I played for the month. So that's it for Call of Cthulhu Alone Against the Flames. Next up, we had the second leg in the Summer of Lovecraft as we played Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. This ended up being a 2-part video because I had to cut part 1 a little bit short in the game against Azathoth. I think that ended with poor Carolyn being devoured after her soul pact came back to bite her in a reckoning. But I definitely would have taken a soul pact with her even knowing that card was coming, with the possibility that was coming, because with Carolyn it's so easy to weaponize soul pacts, and her replacement ended up being Vincent Lee, so we were able to weaponize blood pacts in much the same way. But it ended up with part 2 that we were able to get the win against Azathoth, to lock up the win mathematically in the Summer of Lovecraft. I've talked before about how I don't really like streaming content in the Arkham Horror files, just because it's a little bit too camera cutty. It did seem to work fine in this case, but again, I'm going to be very hesitant on streaming anything in the Arkham Horror files, especially with Arkham Horror the card game, just because I'm cutting back and forth quite often in that video especially. So you're probably not going to see me streaming anything with Arkham Horror the card game, unless I do it on TTS, which is possible, but remains to be seen on that. Anyway, that's it for Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. Our next adventure in Call of Cthulhu found ourselves alone against the dark. Now, this one seemed like it was going to be a rather convoluted adventure as it was starting to unfold a little bit more, to the point where I actually ended up tapping out on Alone Against the Dark, where I think this is probably going to make better dedicated Sunday content, or sometime when I actually have a little bit of time to play with. We may come back to Alone Against the Dark in December, but that remains to be seen because I'm still working on the content schedule for December, but we'll see what happens there. Anyway, next up we moved into the last leg of the Summer of Lovecraft as we played Elder Sign. And this one has been called Cthulhu Yahtzee, where you're trying to match the symbols on the adventures. It's another game from Fantasy Flight. So you're rolling dice to try to match the symbols and complete the adventures. Of course, we were taking on Azathoth as this was the last leg of the Summer of Lovecraft, and we managed to defeat Azathoth to complete the sweep of the Summer of Lovecraft. Of the 3 games in the Summer of Lovecraft, I think this is the one I'd probably have the fewest hesitations with streaming, just because it's a little bit easier, I think. It is camera cutty in a sense, but it's probably a little bit easier to cut that out, especially if I can position the camera just so, where I can have the up-top shot, we zoom back out to that, and then move the camera to zoom in. That's of the 3, I think that's the one I have the fewest hesitations around streaming, but that remains to be seen whether I do anything more with that. So that's it for Elder Sign. Our next Call of Cthulhu adventure found us Alone Against the Tide. This is our yearly visit to Ellsbury, starting off with an auction of basically a widow's dead husband's possessions, essentially. I think there was a journal in there, an idol, some gray cylinders, stuff like that. Basically artifacts that he'd recovered in the course of his adventures. And this one ended up a little bit different because usually one of 2 things happens, where we usually end up getting drowned or something else goes sideways. We end up drowning in a pretty, what's the word I want? I'm trying to think of the word I want. The word's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't find it. Mundane, that's the word I wanted. Usually a pretty mundane word where we're trapped in a building and something happens with a flood and we end up drowning. In this case, we actually were trapped in a church trying to flee the flood, and we ended up consumed by Bakrug, which is an ancient water god essentially in the mythos, after we escaped from a potential ritual situation. This one was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed this adventure. I like Flames and Tide, just because you're able to roll up your own character, and then if you survive that adventure, you're actually able to use that character in subsequent Call of Cthulhu adventures, which is what I did with the character that I took into our Friday group's Masks of Nyarlathotep. So she had survived Alone Against the Flames, and I took her into that campaign. So that's something I really like about that. Anyway, next up after Alone Against the Tide, we actually went into game number 7 on my TAC-UP Wargaming list as we played Warfighter World War II Pacific. This one by DVG has you controlling a squad of soldiers on whatever mission and objective that you've got set up in there. As you might have guessed in me choosing Pacific and setting it in August during Mythos Month, we were taking an adventure out to Relay. There is an expansion in the Warfighter world around Relay in particular. This adventure was a total disaster. What ended up happening was pretty much what seems to happen every time I play Warfighter, where we end up taking a couple suppressions, we have to spend a turn getting rid of them, and then we get swarmed by enemies. And it's kind of left me a little bit with a sour taste in my mouth, which is a little bit annoying considering how much I've spent on Warfighter games. So up to the point where I'm not sure I'm going to do anything more with Warfighter on the channel. In fact, I've got that all set to potentially leave the collection later this year. So, like I said, just didn't really... kind of left a sour taste in my mouth when it was all said and done. And of course, the less said about the universal rulebook for Warfighter, the better. So I'm pretty sure I can't add anything to the conversation on that rulebook, other than it's hideous and I'd rather forget it exists. But minor rambling aside. That's it for Warfighter World War II Pacific.
We had another we had another couple of Call of Cthulhu adventures, so we'll talk about those next. First up, we found ourselves alone against the Frost earlier in the month. This one this one's an adventure where you go on, where you take control of an expedition, of an academic expedition going up to the northern North Hanina wilderness up in Canada somewhere. This one ended up a little bit different. Usually the expedition falls apart around us, but we're able to escape out of the wilderness and get back to civilization. In this case, however, we ended up turning into a windwalker and chasing after Ithaca. But what happened here was it took a lot of willpower in this one, but our human instincts took over, where we let the hunters recover their adventure, and they ultimately forced us to drink boiling fat, which killed us as a windwalker because it thawed our icy hearts, and it was an agonizing death. It was kind of our last human instincts. And yeah, Warfighter, I agree with that being very frustrating. Anywho, that was it for Alone Against the Frost. Another fun adventure, even if the ending was a little bit agonizing. Anyway, our last adventure was the other debut adventure we had, as we found ourselves alone against the static. This one puts us in control of one of a couple that's having a strain on their marriage, going out into a cabin in the wilderness. We end up dealing with something called the Child, where the static is strong with us, essentially. It turned out to be a very crazy story, but then that's the usual par for the course in the Cthulhu mythos. We ultimately ended up being trapped in there. Actually, we ended up getting out to civilization, trying to recover, but we ended up, I don't know if abducted is the word we want, or we ended up being reborn to serve the Child when it was all said and done. So, another fun adventure. I'll probably come back to that playing on the other side, but I did have a small confusion in the adventure that I probably should reach out to Chaosium about. But that's a different story for another day. Next up, we had some more baseball testing as well, as we went into season ticket baseball from Sports Mogul. Again, baseball simulators, you can probably guess by the name. We went to 2014 for a matchup between the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Chicago Cubs. The reason I went to 2014 was because I was testing Replay Baseball as my stat-keeping program. The Cubs ended up winning the game. I think it was like a 3-1. I want to say 3-1 or something like that. I forget what the score actually ended up being, but I was more focused on the test on Replay Baseball than I was on necessarily the score for season ticket. But I was not happy at all with how Replay Baseball turned out, where it ended up crashing on me repeatedly to the point where I finally said, okay, I'm not going to use Replay Baseball, because in the next baseball game that we played, which was Stratomatic Baseball, I was actually testing out Digital Diamond as well. For this one, we went to 2013 with a matchup between the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Arizona Diamondbacks. Excuse me. LA won this game by a final score of 10-2. And I kind of jumped right into the fire on this one, essentially, where I went straight into advanced with a little bit of super advanced. I probably would have put beginner on the channel right away for Stratomatic, just because you just farted, I think. Okay. But yeah, normally I wouldn't have just started right away with advanced with super advanced mixed in there. But apparently I've had enough experience with some of the baseball games, especially in payoff pitch, where everything seemed to make sense and it actually flowed decently quickly. It was a little bit longer than I was expecting, but I think with a little bit more practice, and we'll come back to that idea, I can make everything flow a lot better with Digital Diamond as well. So that's it for Stratomatic Baseball. We also had some wargame testing as well on the channel, as we had a playthrough of Mag 23 Guadalcanal from Historic Wings, where we're early into week 2 in that background channel replay. This was another good day of patrols. We ended up going on 3 missions. We won on the day and the layout looked pretty good. I'm really enjoying that narrative focus, and I think it's helping now that I'm really starting to get into the after-action reporting on the narrative and how everything's going there. So it'll be interesting to watch some of those stories unfold with our pilots. So we'll come back to that at some point, I'm sure. There may be more stream testing coming up with that. Anyway, our next game was another war game that we were testing, and this one was a debut on the channel, as we played Skies Above Britain for the first time from DVG. Quadriplegic, can't feel it, something smells. Okay, then. Anyway, Skies Above Britain is from GMT Games, and it sets you in a squadron of British pilots around the... Actually, let me see if I can take care of something here. This is probably long overdue, so... we will make sure Jester's got the wrench like I've got on his channel, so he can keep an eye on things for me as I'm flowing through this. So Skies Above Britain from GMT, as I mentioned, dumps you into command of a squadron of British pilots in the Battle of Britain. For this patrol, I took out one of the historical squadrons that I've been playing around with to help me learn the game. And the layout actually looked pretty good as I was running everything through. I did enjoy Skies Above Britain, even if I was very much still learning the game. I think once I smooth it out, it's going to make great Wednesday content, or potentially streaming, or potentially if I want to do like an off-season campaign of that from my baseball season replays. So definitely some options there. I'm sure you've not seen the last of Skies Above Britain on the channel. It's going to be very flowy, so it's going to make very good streaming content. Alright, our next game there was... the next game we had on the channel was Marvel Champions, which I played just last night. Marvel Champions from Fantasy Flight has you building decks around the heroes in the Marvel Comics universe around heroes to take on villains. We were debuting Scarlet Witch, and I put her with an aggressive lady in Phoenix as we decided to take on Red Skull. Now, I couldn't make a lot of headway against Red Skull. We weren't able to defeat him ultimately. We got him down to 1 health in phase 1, but he ended up scheming out on us before we could flip him over. I still really enjoy Marvel Champions, and I think some of the problem I was having was Scarlet Witch actually does a lot with screwing around with the encounter deck, going through it quickly. So, because we went through that very quickly, we actually ended up getting an acceleration icon, and I can see in the course of a longer game that being a bigger problem, especially with more players. So Scarlet Witch is definitely one of those, is definitely a dangerous hero to have in a higher player count, where you're going through the encounter deck a lot more quickly, where you're losing a minimum of 8 cards from the deck per turn. So you got to be very careful with a hero like Scarlet Witch in that game, but I'm rambling on that. Last up, we had a game that we played earlier today, as we played 5D20 Football from Inside Sports Games. Just like it sounds, football simulator. But the thing is, this one has you rolling 5D20s to go through setting up your plays and all of that fun stuff. So you actually roll the dice twice, once to set up the offense and once to set up the defense and actually resolve the play. In order to help me debut the game... Jeez, I'm gaseous tonight. In order to help debut the game, we actually went to Super Bowl 20 to do a replay of that, as the New England Patriots played the Chicago Bears. Currently, New England leads that game 3-0 after 1. I might come back to that one. I haven't completely decided yet. It does play slowly, but at least it's not a sprawling mess where I'm not worried about having cards everywhere. You've got the team sheets on... I have the team sheets on either side where I could keep track of everything, and actually referencing the team sheets a lot, which I think is part of what makes it play a little bit slowly, and it's still a very long game. I think the first quarter took about an hour 20, and I'm hoping part of that was just because I was explaining everything. I was trying to explain everything slowly, partly to help me keep it straight, but also partly so you guys can potentially learn that game. We walked through quite a few play calls very slowly in the course of that game. I'm hoping once I don't have to do too much of that, it'll actually speed up and I'll be able to play it fairly quickly. Still not something I'm going to use for a replay, most likely. Just because even if I get the time for that down to like an hour, I'd still be looking at a 4-hour game, which I'm not sure I want to do for any kind of season replay, especially with having to factor in the ticker as well there. So that's a little bit rambly, and I've talked a little bit about my relationship with football games on the channel. I'm going to start looking into data-driven football and I've got Momentum Football that may be the next football game that lands on the channel. So we'll see how that comes up. And I see we're already 20 minutes in, and we're just now about to start talking about Mystical Munchies. For Mystical Munchies this month, we were cooking out of the official Ticket to Ride cookbook. And here's how the recipes went. For starters, we had the appetizer, which was the cheese crisps. The recipe mostly turned out pretty good. A little bit on the it wasn't too bad on the spicy side, but I think the peppers you pick up for that will definitely drive how spicy that recipe can be. I tend to keep everything as mild as I possibly can because I've made no bones about it in the past. Spicy food and I do not get along very well. So just be aware that the peppers can drive how spicy that's going to turn out. Next up, we had the side, which was wild berry salad. It tasted really good, but it was a very seedy recipe, and I think some of that is because you throw all the fruit in the food processor, then you break it up. There's no kind of straining that goes into that. So you do have to be careful in terms of how seedy it gets. So just something to be aware of. It actually tasted really good, but again, be aware that it is a very seedy recipe. Next up, we have the entree, which is the skillet trout. It ended up being a smoke-filled ending, just because of having to put everything on the skillet. But the trout itself was actually pretty good. So probably, well, maybe not a recipe I'm going to make again, but nice to have another fish recipe in the repertoire. Next recipe was peaches and cream crisp, the dessert out of this cookbook. This turned out really good. And I couldn't make the cream that's supposed to go on top of it because I didn't have room to refrigerate the bowl that I needed for it. It also would have gone really nicely with some ice cream on it. But it was actually still really good plain, and it was even pretty good cold still. So, yeah, definitely keeps as leftovers very well. Last up, we had the drink, which was the root beer float. And it's a pretty typical root beer float with root beer and ice cream. You could have added in vodka for a shot about halfway through the pour, and a maraschino cherry for garnish. Neither of which I used because I didn't pick up cherries when I went grocery shopping, and I don't drink alcohol, so nothing doing on that front. So that's it for Mystical Munchies. Let me pull up the AMA questions, but I don't think we had any for August. We did not have any Ask Me Anything questions for August. As a reminder for how you get questions on for Ask Me Anything, from any video between this recap and the last video for the month, leave a question in the video with an AMA tag so I know it's for this segment, and as long as it's not too personal, I will answer it. Once again, you guys know my rule of thumb. Well, regulars know my rule of thumb. If this is your first time happening on an episode of Pinot with Phoenix, as far as what I deem too personal... Oh, crap, I'm not recording. Oh, well. I'll have to fix that for the setting. But anyway, as far as what I would deem too personal, if you don't want it asked of you, don't ask it of me. That's kind of the rule of thumb I've got in terms of how you determine if a question is too personal. Like I said, if you don't want it asked of you, don't ask it of me. And good to know you love root beer floats, Jester. You might like that recipe, even if it's a little on the boring side. So, before we talk about what's coming in September, Phoenix needs to vent a little bit. It's been a very, shall we say, hellacious week. So, Tuesday night, I go to run the dishwasher. Things went kind of crazy for me this week. Tuesday night, go to run the dishwasher like normal. It's a little bit loud, but that's typical. Actually, it was even a little bit louder than typical. I didn't really disregard it because, again, the dishwasher had been being loud for a while. So, run the dishwasher, let it do its thing, let it cool down a bit. Go to empty it, and I realized two things are wrong. One, the dishes aren't necessarily dry. Aren't very dry. This isn't necessarily completely abnormal, because I do usually have to dry at least a little bit of it out. But this was still way too wet, where nothing was very dry. Most of it seemed to be clean, but the wetness of the dishes kind of bothered me. What was even worse, though, was that there was still standing water in the dishwasher, to the point where when I put my hand in there, it was about knuckle deep, and I was like, okay, that's not good. So I fired an email off to my apartment complex. They came by Wednesday to check it out, but I didn't find out until I got a voicemail about the dishwasher when I was streaming Call of Cthulhu Alone Against the Static earlier this week. where it turns out it was beyond repair, and the new guy was going to come in and fix it on Friday. So I was like, okay, cool. So Thursday, actually before that, Wednesday morning, my desktop PC crapped out on me to the point where I actually had to schedule an appointment with the Geek Squad at Best Buy to bring it in for repairs. So I have a little bit of drama around that. I'm not going to get into the work drama because there was some stuff around that came up. Anyway, what ended up happening there was I brought it in, got everything set up, did Mystical Munchies on Friday. So leaned in on that because I hadn't heard anything. Their initial thought was, okay, it's the power supply. So I was like, okay, buy a new power supply. We'll try that, see if that repairs it. Lean in Friday, they didn't do anything with it. Saturday, so today rolls around, and I'm like, okay. So I stream 5D20 football with the plan of, okay, after that, I'm going to go to Best Buy, start getting some research in front of me, see where they're at on that. Go into Best Buy, they come, and the Geek Squad guy says, oh, we didn't do anything with it. So I'm thinking, or actually, no, they did do something with it, but the power supply didn't work. And I'm thinking to myself, could you not have told me about that? Anyway, so after that, he tells me he's going to try a few things. He might have an answer for me later on. So I'm like, okay, cool. Go look at desktops, do a little bit of research there, take a look at a few of them, and I'm like, okay, let's go back home, relax for a little bit, and we'll figure things out from there. So right before the War Room started, I think it was like 2:45, I'd seen the notification that the War Room was going live, but I get the phone call that they're like, hey, your PC's ready, the power supply didn't do it, we're not going to, and it's not making noise anymore, but it's also not turning on. He told me it could have been the CPU or the motherboard. They could have tried to replace it, but I'm thinking, and I even told him at the time, I was like, okay, so by the time we try replacing the CPU and the motherboard, and the time it's going to take to track them down, I'm probably going to have about as much money into it as replacing the PC has. So I decided to just replace the thing, and that's what I'm streaming on tonight. The backup plan was going to be running Pinot with Phoenix on the laptop, but fortunately I didn't need that backup plan. I was able to get my new PC set up fairly quickly because I was able to restore from a backup. So there's that relief as well. So yeah, very interesting week all around, and that's your mild rant of Phoenix Needs to Vent. Anyway, as I mentioned, I don't think Phoenix Needs to Vent is going to be a special segment on the channel Is it going to be part of Pinot with Phoenix moving forward. This was just a rare week where I just needed to vent a little bit. It was a very chaotic week. So now we can get back to our regularly scheduled programming. So now let's talk about what's coming in September. Our first order of business in September is going to fall on a very historically significant date. And that will be reflected in game number 8 on my TAC Up Wargaming list for this year, as we lead off September by playing Tiger Leader from DVG. After that, we're going to have the first of our 2 fall campaigns for the year, as this one is going to actually take us into Astronight's Eternity to play their expedition mode. As for Wednesdays, we're also going to start with the Leader series with another game debut, and we're going to stick to the Leader series as we dip under the waves to play U-Boat Leader from DVG. Excuse me. Next, we're going to revisit our background playthrough of Interceptor Ace version 1 from Compass Games. After that, we'll start a new background campaign of Hero Realms, and the last game of the month will be a rapidly growing favorite on the channel as we play Age of Innovation. Mystical Munchies for September will take us to the depths of hell as we cook out of the official Diablo cookbook, also the Inns of Sanctuary. So out of the official Diablo cookbook, we'll be cooking Bandit's Bacon Candy, Hoodwinked Honey Carrots, Necromancer's Boiled Fish, and Iris Plum and Honey Cake. With that in mind, let's go ahead and wrap this video up. And that is another episode of Pinot with Phoenix in the books for August 2024. Tomorrow we're starting with game number 8 on my TAC Up Wargaming list as we play Tiger Leader from DVG. Wednesday we're dipping under the waves as we play U-Boat Leader. Saturday, Mystical Munchies will start out of the official Diablo cookbook with the appetizer, Bandit's Bacon Candy. Thank you for watching the video. Please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to turn on notifications so you get my content. Be well, stay safe, take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and I'll be back with more videos in the future. Until then, take care everyone.